listen-in only webinar. So you will need to plug into your PCs, laptop, Macs, mobile phones, any device you are listening the webinar through. So please do ensure that you're plugged in and you're with your headsets, not disturbing anyone around you if you're in an open plan office as well. You can ask questions anytime, so there is a Q&A box, a pop-up that you'll see on your screens on the kind of bottom right-hand side. If not, in the script at the bottom of your screen, you will also see Q&A in a purple box written in there. So just click on it, a box will appear, and you can put in all the questions you have about the webinar or any discussions. Or if you have any technical difficulties as well, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and one of our colleagues will pick it up and answer it there and there as well. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared hopefully within a week. So you will have access to the recording and the slides after the webinar as well, without any issues on that domain. Now, very quickly to introduce our speakers today. Today we have two of our lead analysts from the Refinitiv Oil Research team joining us, who will be speaking about IMO 2020. As I mentioned, a major looming topic in the oil industry and the wider commodities industries to a certain degree as well. We'll have Captain Ranjit Raja. He's the lead analyst. He covers the Middle East and North African market with a very primary focus on the oil flows and the shipping data. He and his team, they formulate the research, market insights by generating the trade flow and analytics, which enables the real-time trading information and operational intelligence for Refinitiv clients and obviously to the wider industry as well. The team Captain Ranjit is obviously on, specializes in vessel tracking, generating big data for the midstream and downstream oil markets, and also including the marine sector using the algos and predictive modeling that we are known for in the markets and the industry. Prior to Refinitiv, he was sailing on the shows, on the seas, as we call it, Captain Ranjit. He was a master mariner and obviously has been leading a number of ship owners in the tanker fleets, and also then completed an MBA from University of Western Ontario in Canada. So a proper qualified sailor and a shipman, as we can call it, on our side. Joining Ranjit will be Yaoyan Chong. He's our Director of Oil and Research Forecasts in Asia as part of our Commodities Research Division. He's also the one who initiated, and many of you might be consuming, the oil flows assessment module that we provide for Asia. So he's the man behind it. He's been working across the oil industry from many different dimensions and domains for more than 10 years, starting as a price editor in different areas, and also covered the region as an energy correspondent for Reuters before coming into the Refinitiv team. So with that, Ranjit and YC, over to you guys.
All right, thanks, Rohan. Hope everybody can hear me. So what I'll do is we'll start and I'll take a look at the demand-supply side in terms of what will happen for IMO 2020. But before we do that, just like to introduce a little bit about our research team. So we are the part of the commodities research team of Refinitiv, of what used to be Thomson Reuters. We were established in 2011, 7 years ago. And this commodities research division today, we have about 150 to 200 analysts covering all the commodity asset classes, being energy, of which oil is a part of, as well as power and gas. And then we have agriculture and metals. Okay, within the oil group, we have about 40 analysts globally, of which we have a group in Singapore, where I sit. We have a group in Dubai, where Ranjit sits, and then we have another 2 groups in London and Houston. So what we do is we produce what we call near-term in-depth analysis of supply demand fundamentals by oil product group by region. So what exactly that means essentially is that one of our products, we call it oil flows. So we are looking at basically oil byproduct flowing into demand centers or out of supply centers. So for example, from an Asia perspective, we would be looking at how much crude oil is coming into Asia on a real-time, current month or month ahead basis. Okay, and we produce a second product, we call it curves, as in short for price forward curves. We produce price forward curves across the 24-hour time cycle. We have 5 timestamps across that cycle, and it's primarily used for risk management. Okay, obviously our flows, we need to benchmark ourselves against something to see how accurate we are. So we do benchmark against custom numbers where possible. And for crude into China, for example, we are 99 to 100% versus customs. For gas oil coming out of East Asia, we are 85 to 90% versus customs, and naphtha into North Asia, we are also 85 to 90%. Okay, so let's go into IMO 2020. As we all know, come January 1st, 2020, marine fuels would have to move to 0.5% sulfur specification from the current 3.5% sulfur, which we believe this would be one of the most disruptive events in the recent history of the oil industry. Okay, today we estimate that the bunker market has demand of 15 to 16 million tons globally of marine fuels, with most of this demand coming from the East of Suez, i.e. Asia and the Middle East. Okay, let's break that down. Asia alone accounts for about 8 million tons a month of this 15, 16 million tons, of which about 50% comes from Singapore, which is the world's largest bunkering port. And if you look at the chart here, right, Singapore plus Malaysia is about 4.4 million tons. China, both international vessels and domestic vessels, about 1.5 million tons. Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, and South Asia make up the rest. The Middle East itself is about 1.3 million tons a month, most of which comes from the port of Fujairah, right? And the region also serves neighboring Africa, which takes about 500,000 tons a month. Europe, mainly from ARA and the Med, as well as Russia, actually, accounts for nearly 3 million tons a month, while the U.S. and the rest of the Americas, namely Brazil, Canada, and Panama, takes up another just over 3 million tons a month, with the bulk of this demand coming from the U.S. Okay, U.S. and Europe actually have become CCAs some time ago, and they have sufficient low sulfur supplies to cover their needs. It is Asia and the Middle East which are currently almost 100% high sulfur environment, where we believe the supply of IMO compliant fuel will be the most challenging. Okay, in a nutshell, there isn't enough production of low sulfur fuel oil globally to meet the 15, 16 million tons of demand. Okay, so what does the world do, right? There are two possible solutions. One is to replace 3.5 sulfur fuel oil with gas oil. By gas oil, I do mean pure gas oil, or find a way to blend fuel oil and gas oil, which is easier said than done. And the other option is to install scrubbers, devices that will remove sulfur from your vessel's emissions. But so far, when we've seen not many ship owners have chosen to do that on existing vessels. Okay, so let's look at the gas oil option. My colleague Ranjit will actually talk about scrubbers later. Okay, so we believe that the world today is actually very, very amply supplied with gas oil, but mostly of the ultra-low sulfur 10 ppm grade. This is largely due to huge increases in refining capacities over the past 2-3 years in Asia and in the Middle East. Okay, also driven by the shale boom in the U.S., as well as, so collectively today the three major exporting regions, meaning Asia, Middle East, and the U.S. are exporting about 18 million tons a month since 2018. This is up from 13 million tons just 4 years ago. Okay, Asia is actually the world's largest exporter of diesel today, and hitting a record high of 9 million tons a month this year, jumping from an average of 6 to 6.5 million tons per month from 2013-15. Most of the gas oil that's coming out of Asia comes from India, Korea, and China. China is the one that has seen the most increase in terms of exports. Today, China is doing about 2 million tons a month, up from under 500,000 tons a month just 3-4 years ago. Okay, Middle East exports today are at about 4 million tons a month, okay, in 2019, following large additions to refining capacities in the region. Okay, and if you look at this slide, okay, it shows you the price spread between ultra low sulfur and 500 ppm sulfur gas oil, and this price spread has been closer under $1 a barrel since 2-3 years ago for the entire forward curve. Okay, and right, so if a vessel were to switch to gas oil, right, how much higher would gas oil cost versus devalued high sulfur fuel oil? So we have used the spread between 10 ppm and 380 CST fuel oil for calendar 2020 as a proxy, right? And this average value that we have published through our forward curves, we take an average from January 1st until today, has been averaging between $270 to $280 a ton. This versus the 2015 to 19 average of $195 to $205 a ton. So you're talking about a good $80 to $90 less, $80 to $90 higher. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, basically, if the world were to turn to gas oil, it would be 10 ppm gas oil, right? And if it is 10 ppm gas oil, then meeting sulfur requirements, even if you were to push it to 0.1, is not a problem. Okay. All grades of gas oil, even MGO, however, are typically of very low viscosity, 2 to 4.5 CST, and this is not ideal. This low viscosity can actually lead to incomplete engine combustion, can cause internal leakages in engines, in boilers, in pumps, among others, as well as limiting engine efficiency. Okay, and a potential solution would be to blend gas oil and fuel oil to achieve compliance, but there would also be compatibility problems, okay? Because fuel oil is mostly paraffinic and gas oil is largely aromatic, and you can't blend these two without throwing many specifications off. Okay, so what has the world done in terms of reacting to the regulations, right? We know that pricing agencies like Platts have started assessing 0.5% marine fuel prices, and this has since the start of the year. Today, the premium over 380 is about $150 to $200 a ton, right, rising from $40 at the start of the year. However, liquidity in this quote has been thin. We've only seen the first trade about a month ago, and so far only about 200,000 tons have been traded on the window so far. In fact, most physical LSFO cargoes have been traded using 10 ppm gas oil as a benchmark. So the market has not adopted this quote as a benchmark yet. And the exchanges, particularly ICE and CME, have listed 0.5% contracts for Rotterdam, Singapore, and Houston. And that spread has been consistently at 190, 195 for Rotterdam, and 195, 200 for Singapore from Jan. But today, that spread has widened, obviously, as high sulfur fuel oil devalues. Okay, how has the suppliers been preparing for this? So suppliers like Exxon, Shell, BP, Sinopec, Totsa, among others, have all declared their ability to offer IMO compliant fuel. Sinopec actually announced that they can produce 10 million tons a year by 2020 from 10 of its 20 over refineries. And they, together with PetroChina, have pledged to produce 14 million tons a year, but they would, and have lobbied the Chinese government for tax waivers. Okay, in China, you have to pay a consumption tax to export fuel oil. So if the Chinese government allowed, then they would be given that waiver. But as of today, that waiver has yet to be given. Okay, and we have also seen blenders turn to Australian heavy crudes such as Pyrenees and Van Hoff for blending. Okay, in terms of infrastructure, there's quite a bit of new infrastructure that's been built in Asia and the Middle East, given the shortage of native supply. Okay, so Uniper Energy was the first. They built a 3 million ton a year LSFO plant in Fujairah, producing mostly 0.1% sulfur cargoes. And they have already started selling to the West, to the Middle East, and to Asia. Korean refiner SK Innovation is building a vacuum residue desulfurization unit, which will produce 34,000 barrels per day of LSFO in its refining complex in Ulsan. We expect this to complete by NQ1. Vitol is building another LSFO plant in Malaysia on their storage facility. This is 35.5 KBD, and this will be ready come middle of the year. Okay, the market actually has actively been stocking up LSFO since second half 2019, and we estimate that there are about 8 to 9 million tons of inventories in storage right now, both onshore and floating in Asia and in the Middle East. Okay, most of these barrels have been stored on floating storages in Asia, so there's a list of the floating storage that we know are carrying fuel oil, low sulfur fuel oil, and this includes a ULCC, the Oceania that arrived in end September. So we believe that this ULCC would largely be used by its owner, Euronav, for its own fleet. Okay, so in terms of what we've seen, in terms of new LSFO production capacity, we believe there will be about 2.4 to 2.5 million tons a month, based on the chart here. And we believe there can be more supplies coming in from particularly the private Chinese refiners if they are given an export tax waiver. Okay, and other Asian refiners have also shown an ability to produce LSFO when margins are good. The Koreans, the Indonesians, the Taiwanese have all done it in September, August last year, or this year, sorry. Right? And we believe another game changer could be the port of Zhoushan in China, because Zhoushan has already declared that it wants to be a major bunkering port to take market share from Singapore, and they are considering removing export duties for its jurisdiction. If they do that, this would allow the private refiners to supply marine fuels freely within its borders. Okay, so what about existing production? Okay, existing production in Asia, basically, and the Middle East are basically at about 750 to 800,000 tons per month. Okay, and blenders are using, well, this includes the Australian heavy crudes that we talked about earlier, okay, that the blenders have been using, and this includes a new grade called the Vincent that is just came into production. Okay, that's about 200,000 tons a month. Okay, Indonesian residues such as LSWR is also a regular, has been a regular source of supply for a long time. We're talking about 80,000 tons from Indonesia and another 40,000 tons from Thailand, sorry. Okay, this is where the problem is. So with all the production that we have taken into consideration, right, in Asia and the Middle East, right, and we believe that the new production, the existing production, we still believe that there will be imports coming in from outside Asia, mainly from the West, and we estimate that it will be about 1.5 million tons per month. Okay, and On top of that, we expect, as I said, more LSFO supply coming from the Chinese and the other Asian refiners that we have talked about earlier. And we believe that there would be about 15% of non-compliance. So that translated from the 9.3 million tons per month total would be about 1.4 million tons. So in all, we expect a supply gap of 1.5 to 2 million tons per month, right, that the market will have to turn to the gas oil pool. So this is where gas oil will come in. Okay, European demand right now, we're looking at the balance in Europe. So European demand right now just stands shy of 3 million tons a month, of which mostly high sulfur fuel oil with MGO making up the balance. We expect MGO bunkering volumes to increase to replace some of the lost HSFO demand, right? And we believe that net Europe will be balanced to surplus come 2020. Okay, and we believe that VS 0.5% sulfur fuel oil will be the dominant compliant fuel option in Europe, as supply is robust and sufficient to cover demand there. Okay, and if you look at the forward curve, right, we can see that the larger than expected supply in Europe has already pressured prices, okay, in ARA, while Asia is still backwardated. Okay, the other source of demand is Russia, or supply is Russia. Basically, Russian VGO exports average about 1.2 million tons a month, and is largely currently consumed by Europe as refinery feedstock. However, come 2020, we believe that this low sulfur VGO could be drawn into the bunker blend pool, very much like the Australian heavy crudes, if economics are favorable. Okay, refinery upgrades in Russia is limited, and the country will continue to produce and export HSFO, although current levels at about 2.5 million tons a month on average for 2019. Okay, despite this relatively large export volumes, Russian exports have actually shrank drastically from peak volumes of about 4.5 million tons a month just 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, and we expect Europe to continue exporting some HSFO to Asia, okay, and some VLSFO to both Asia and the Middle East. Okay, in the U.S., right, basically U.S. demand today is about 3.2, 3.3 million tons per month, broken down, as you can see, with the U.S. itself accounting for the bulk of it at 2 million tons. Okay, the potential fuels that are coming out of the U.S., which include VLSFO, blended with light cycle oil, FCC bottoms, and has asphaltenes, then with viscosity that's reasonably high. Okay, another option would be top condensates, but that would be low viscosity, and that may not be a popular option. Okay, and the last one being VGO at 50 CST, which again could also be an option. Okay, this gives you a breakdown of the impact of IMO on the Americas, where U.S. Gulf Coast would have surplus volumes, right? The U.S. Atlantic Coast would transport the ARB to the U.S. Gulf Coast. The West Coast would probably be slightly short, right? Panama is supplied from the U.S. Brazil would be actually balanced to surplus, and Canada would be balanced. Okay, so just to take you through in this final months of HSFO, the market has been very much distorted with, on one hand, steep double-digit backwardation, high cash premiums, high ex-off premiums, also at double-digit levels, while the cracks have weakened rapidly. Okay, and this is on the back of poor margins, thin liquidity since 2015. Ironically, we believe that these strong fundamentals are actually bearish for the market, because it basically makes margins thinner and costs higher. Okay, and liquidity in the paper markets have been thin, okay, since 2015, and we are at 7-year low levels in terms of liquidity. Okay, this chart shows you the cracks, okay, and as you can see, the cracks have weakened to almost minus $15 this month. Okay, but this is on the back of being strong even at positive levels for the 10 months before July. Okay, so this weakening is, as I said, as we come towards the end of shelf life of HSFO, the cracks are weakening tremendously. Okay, basically in terms of supply into the Singapore trading hub, it has also dropped to a 7-year low of under 6 million tons a month, and characterized mainly by low Western arrivals at below 3 million tons a month. Okay, we have not seen these numbers for more than 10 years. However, the supply is basically, or the downside is limited by supplies from the Middle East that have gone up to 2.2 to 2.3 million tons a month. Okay, and why is that so? Couple of reasons. One main reason is that we believe Iranian fuel oil is still coming here very freely. And if you look at the chart, it gives you, we have taken a snapshot of supply from the UAE, Iraq, and Iran between the months of October and May for 2017-18, when there were no sanctions, and it totaled about 1.5 to 1.6 million tons. For 18-19, when there are sanctions, the total volume is still the same. So it tells you that the Iranian volumes are coming through other means, coming through STS areas in the UAE and Iraq and etc. Okay, total imports into Asia have also fallen to under 7 million tons a month. Singapore has also fallen to under 4 million tons a month. These are 9-year lows. Right? China has been fairly steady because of Zhoushan at 1.3 million tons a month, while Korea, Hong Kong, and Japan has also been lower to steady. Okay, one reason, basically sales of marine fuels in Singapore has fallen for the last 2 years and down to below 4 million tons a month. China has also fallen despite Zhoushan to just under 900,000 tons a month. Okay, and Hong Kong sales have actually dropped to a record low of 220,000 tons in May. Okay, well below the average of 600,000 tons. This we believe to be driven by the trade wars. Okay, we talked about liquidity. This chart basically shows you the liquidity per day. This is actually Platts window paper volume for fuel oil. So this year we are at 75,000 tons per day, well below above 200,000 tons per day in 2012. Okay, and this loss of liquidity has led to multiple issues in the market, including the ability of some, or to lose trading leverage. That has been the lifeblood of some trading companies. Okay, so in conclusion, we believe that the cracks will stay weak at current levels and weaken further as we move towards the end of the year. However, at the same time, we believe that the double-digit backwardation will stay steep simply because high sulfur demand will be there right till the end, right till December 31st, while supplies are running out. Okay. However, we do expect an improvement to liquidity and speculative appetite as players see this potential volatility as a money-making opportunity. Okay, and we have already seen an uptick for onshore tanks, which has happened since the start of 2019, right? And however, yes, with the large inventories of LSFO in storage right now, we expect there to be no shortage for Asia and the Middle East at the very least in the first Q, and the market might even feel oversupplied. Okay, however, given this volume gap given the huge volume gap between global bunker demand and LSFO production, we expect these large inventories to run down and could be run down fairly quickly. Okay, and the market could suddenly become very tight very quickly. And with that, I turn it over to Captain Ranjit, my colleague. Please, Ranjit, yours.
Thanks a lot, Vaisi. Thank you so much for everyone being present for this webinar today. Just 1 second, I'm getting access for my controls. All right, so for my part of the section, we will be looking a little bit more detail into the shipping sector, and we'll try and see how the impact of this regulation is going to have a ripple effect into the shipping markets, both on the supply side and the demand side. And in order to start that, we will first start looking at how the global fleet has been evolving over the last few years. And from this chart, it's very clear that the total number of ships has been on an uptrend, and we have been seeing an increase of around 2% on an annual basis in terms of the global fleet market. And what is interesting here is that amongst this increase in the overall global fleet, it's not just the sheer number of ships that's been increasing, but it's also the size of the ships that have been coming into the market. And following for the next couple of years, for 2020 and 2021, the current order book looks quite strong. And we also expect that the new ships that are coming into the global fleet, especially the larger ships, are going to be coming with the scrubber equipment fitted on board, which means they are going to be going more into the competing against the high sulfur fuel oil pool than the low sulfur fuel oil market. And this one, for the overview of the shipping sector, it's going to be, like I mentioned, it's not just the sheer number of ships, but also the size of ships that's having an impact on the global bunker market. So if we first start with the container fleet, which is the top right corner, the chart clearly shows that the larger container fleet, which is 5,000 TEU and upwards, have increased by almost 30% in the last 5 years. Whereas the smaller fleet, that's the less than 5,000 TEU size of the container ships, have actually dropped by about 10%. So this shows that, and container fleet in general constitutes for almost 25% of the global bunker demand when we talk about the bunkers globally. And similar impact on the bulk carrier market as well. Bulk carriers actually constitute the largest number of ships for the global fleet. And if you look at the larger size of ships, which is the Capesize and above, the actual numbers have increased by almost 10%, although the total number of ships is smaller compared to the smaller ships, which have increased only by about 3%. And when we look at the tanker market, so generally the health of the tanker market is determined by the global ton-mile demand of the ships. And what this essentially means is that it determines the utilization of the ships to show how the fleet is being used in terms of the available tonnage versus the required tonnage in the market. And this is directly related to the actual new orders or the deliveries that comes into the market and the demolitions of the ships as well. So we can see as of 2016, there were a lot of new builds that were coming into the market, which means there is an oversupply of tonnage, which essentially pushes the ton-mile demand down. And similarly, in 2018, we had a lot of ships that were sent for scrapping, and which essentially reduced the available tonnage that's there in the market, and which pushes the ton-mile demand up as well. And if we look at, in terms of the cost perspective for the shipping industry, it's important to see what impact this is expected to have in terms of the operational cost of the ships. So the spread between the LSMGO and the high sulfur fuel oil has been is currently somewhere in the range of about $300 per metric ton, and that between the 0.5 and the high sulfur fuel oil is somewhere around $220 per metric ton. And if we translate that into the daily operating cost of the ship and the voyage cost of the ship, we are looking at, for a fleet anywhere that ranging from 20 to 80 metric tons a day in terms of the consumption, to see an increase in cost of anywhere between $6,000 to $25,000 if you're using the gas oil as an option, and anywhere between $4,000 to about $18,000 when we are using the low sulfur fuel oil as the option. And When you convert that into a total voyage cost, you're looking at an incremental voyage cost of between $1 to $1.5 million with the MGO, and about, say, $750 to about $1.2 million in terms of the low sulfur fuel oil market. So what this essentially means is that irrespective of the fuel that is being chosen for compliance, there is going to be an enormous increase in terms of the operating cost of the ship, which needs to be factored in when we are planning for the voyage costing of the fleet. This is a quick snapshot of the bunker demand. YC explained a lot more in detail in terms of how the global supply demand looks. And the demand side of it is determined by aggregation of all the bunker centers or the demand centers that we keep a tab of. Singapore had its peak in 2017 at about 4.2 million tons a month, and this is also the world's largest bunkering hub. Although 2018 and 2019, there have been few issues in the Singapore bunker market which has caused a dip in the overall demand. 2018 more due to the contamination issues which lasted for about 2 to 3 months. And in 2019, there has generally been a tightness in the Singapore bunker market. The Rotterdam bunker market again constitutes to a total of about 750,000 cubics a month, which majority has been taken over by the gas oil market than the fuel oil, mainly because of the SECA regulations that it falls under. Fujairah, it's usually a follow-up of Singapore. They both go hand in hand. That is, Fujairah tries and makes up most of the volumes when Singapore goes down. But a big component of the Fujairah demand this year specifically has been the increase in geopolitical issues and increase in the risk premiums for ships calling the region, which has generally resulted in a drop in the bunker demand for Fujairah. But considering Fujairah is trading, at least for the last 3 to 4 months, at about $50 discount to Singapore, they have still been able to sustain their volumes to some extent than what would have otherwise resulted because of the various risks and the geopolitical issues happening in the region. In terms of compliance, I'm sure most of the people in the industry as of now would be aware what the options are on hand. But as a quick reference, it basically falls down to these 5 categories, which is either using the gas oil or using the 0.5% compliant fuel, retrofitting the vessels for using an alternate fuel such as LNG, installation of an exhaust gas cleaning system or a scrubber equipment, and of course the last, which is still, we believe, forms for a small bit of component in terms is the non-compliance, which is about 15%, like what YC mentioned earlier. So when we are talking about the 0.5% market, although globally the volumes are rather, this is going to be the most preferred option for most of the ship owners and operators to choose as a choice of compliance. But what we would like to highlight is the associated challenges that comes with using this as an option in terms of an operational perspective. And we categorize the challenges as 3 different categories, which is the quality challenge, the availability challenge, and the reliability challenge. The quality mainly because, like YC mentioned, there are going to be a lot of blends that is going to be made available in the industry. And it is not very clear right now in terms of how each of these blends will act together if they are mixed, or if there is a chance of them getting mixed either onshore or on board the ships. So that remains a huge challenge when it comes to using, or rather bunkering from different ports through different suppliers for different blends of fuel in order to ensure compliance. And this essentially results in the stability of the fuel that will be used on the ship's engines as well. In terms of the availability, we expect the major bunkering hubs to be well supplied, mainly because of the enormous amount of storage that has been stocked up during the second half of this year. And those are expected to cater more in terms of the global demand that is focused towards the huge bunkering hubs. But the challenge, however, is on the smaller ports or the smaller hubs, which is expected to have its own logistical and cost issues. So if a fleet or if a ship is expected to call in one of the smaller ports, then I think there needs to be a much more proactive response in terms of sourcing the compliant fuel and identifying the bunkering spots where the fuel is available and also the right price in terms of making and covering the voyage. The reliability issue is more, again, touches to the incompatible fuel blends that will essentially result in a mechanical damage on board the ships. And what this essentially means is that there is going to be a need for increased use of lubricants or increased maintenance requirements for the machineries. And because there is an increased risk of machinery damages, then there is a high expectation that the premiums for the hull and machinery are also expected to go up starting from the next renewal cycle. The LNG as an alternative, like we touched upon, it is one of the options that is being considered. But if we look at the global ships that have either been completed the retrofit or the ones that are currently on order, all put together, it constitutes only for about 300,000 tons per month of demand that will be transferred from the fuel oil market into LNG. And that essentially constitutes to somewhere in the range of about 2% of the global bunker demand. And that is not a huge shift in order to move or act as an alternate in terms of establishing the infrastructures that are required to cater for this market. And right now, the infrastructures are more prevalent in the European markets and a little bit in the Asian and the US market. But except that, there is going to be a little incentive or little facilities that are going to be made available to cater for this as a primary fuel. So coming to scrubbers, like everyone has been discussing in the industry in general, this is one of the most debated topics of whether to install a scrubber or not. I think the biggest challenge in that has been the enormous high upfront cost that is involved with the equipment. It might cost anywhere between $1 to $5 million, depending on the size of the ship and the type of equipment that is being installed on a particular vessel. And although this is a one-time cost for a particular ship owner, the challenge is if a ship owner has a huge fleet of, say, 10 or 20 or 30 ships, then the upfront cost keeps getting added up, which becomes an inhibiting factor. And there have also been cases where scrubbers have resulted in damage on board the ships or failure on board the ships, which also means that you're adding on top of it the loss in operational hours or the increase in operating cost or maintenance cost of the equipment as well. Although, like I mentioned earlier, most of the new ships, especially the larger ones which are coming into the global fleet of late, are coming with the scrubber equipment installed mainly because it costs roughly just about 10 to 15% to install the equipment on a new build rather than a retrofit on an old vessel. So a quick snapshot of the scrubber market. There is a huge disparity in terms of what was initially expected by IMO as the total number of ships that would be equipped with the scrubber equipment as of 1st Jan 2020, which was about 4,000 ships was the initial estimation as per the feasibility study that was conducted. But whereas realistically, we expect the industry to be comprising only of about 2,400 to 2,500 ships which have the scrubber equipment fitted and ready to use as on the 1st of January. And this disparity is a huge factor of why we believe it's going to cause a deficit in terms of the compliant fuel market as well. And when it comes to the suppliers who are installing the equipment, there are about, say, 5 suppliers who are catering to more than 50% of the market share. And like we see, most of the equipments that are fitted are still the open loop the open loop scrubbers, which constitutes to almost 80% compared to the hybrid or the closed loop. And although open loop has its own challenges, that is, the various port states have come up with the regulations of restricting the discharge of the open loop waters into their sea. But we believe the amount of bunker that a ship consumes while at anchorage or during port operations is very small compared to what it burns during its voyage on the high seas. So we believe even in spite of all these restrictions and regulations that's coming up, open loop still factors as the most prevalent choice when it comes to choosing the choice of scrubber to be installed on board. And in terms of the total number, the last survey showed by end of 2020 or end of 2021, we will have roughly about 3,700 ships that will be installed, which translates into a global demand of about 2.5 million tons in terms of the high sulfur fuel oil market. And next is, of course, the compliance question, which has been raised more often by the players in the market, whether how it needs to be enforced and what is going to be the result of someone being found non-compliant. And although IMO is the body who is implementing the regulation, we believe the enforcement of the regulation will be more from either the port state controls or the flag states for the respective ships. And the port states will be more responsible for the operation of the ships, or when the operation or when the ships operate in the territorial waters of a particular port and inside the ports. But whereas the flag state is going to be responsible more when it comes into the open sea as well. And in terms of the high sulfur fuel oil market, we believe most of the flag states are the flags of convenience, such as Panama, Liberia, where the incentive to follow up and make an investigation or see how the non-compliance has been done, there is little incentive for these agencies. So I think we believe it comes down to the class authorities who basically issue the MARPOL certificate for maritime pollution certificate, and the port state controls who will play a much bigger role in making sure and enforcing this regulation is being complied to. So this is a quick snapshot or a flowchart to determine how a compliance can be enforced. This is more like a ready reference for most of the ship owners, operators, and charterers there. And the question starts with whether there is a scrubber equipment installed or not. And if it is installed, then it becomes pretty straightforward to make sure that the equipment is functioning properly, the operational parameters are being checked properly, and the fuel procurement has been established properly. Once that is done, it is a straightforward move for being compliant. And if not, then there has to be some element of the compliant fuel that needs to be arranged in order to make sure that is being used whenever the equipment is down. And on the absence of scrubbers, then it again falls down to either the use of an alternative fuel or the 0.5% compliant fuel. And what is also important is to understand the fuel oil non-availability report that has been formulated by IMO. And what this essentially means is that even though there can be sufficient measures that a ship owner can take in order to ensure procurement of the compliant fuel, like we spoke before during the challenges, that the availability challenge, if the fuel is not available at the port in which the ship is calling, then there is a chance for the ship owners to raise what is called the fuel oil non-availability report, which gives them an exemption to push the procurement to the next port or the next port of call for the ship in order to buy the compliant fuel. And some of the ports, such as Singapore specifically, have laid down very clear procedures in order to determine every ship that's coming in and out are following or are remaining compliant to this regulation. They are starting to establish what is called the electronic notification of arrival, which mandates every ship that's calling or coming into the port of Singapore to declare the sulfur content of the fuel that is being stored on board and what it plans to use during its stay on board. And they have also established a list of approved and licensed bunker suppliers in the port, which basically authorizes them to supply the compliant fuel. And it is being encouraged for all the ship owners and operators to stick with the licensed bunker suppliers in the port in order to make sure they receive the right fuel and at the right specifications. And they've also gone one step ahead in order to arrange for the reception facilities for especially ships which have the hybrid or the closed-loop scrubbers installed. And also, as of 1st March 2020, when the carriage ban for high sulfur fuel oil comes into force, there are also facilities to remove the high sulfur fuel oil from ships which are not equipped with the scrubber equipment and replace them with the compliant fuel on board the ships. So in essence, some of the action points to be considered are to make sure that the compliance and the transition fuel clause are being familiarized by all the ship owners, operators, and charterers. And this will essentially determine how smooth the transition happens from usage of the 3.5% to 0.5% market. The next one would be to manage the fuel on board the ship, which also means that there needs to be a clear plan established and put in place for determining the bunker segregation on board the ships, also the tank cleaning requirements in order to switch from the high sulfur to the low sulfur fuel oil, and also the crew training that needs to be required for the changeover procedures for using or switchover procedures between the fuel specifications, or even for the changeover procedures for the compliant fuel but procured from two different places or from two different suppliers. The implementation plan would cover more about the risk assessments that will come into place in terms of using the new fuel on board. And the documentation is the next part, which we determine is going to be the most crucial part in this whole process. What this essentially means is that the only way of proving compliance is to have the required documents, both in terms of the bunker delivery notes, the compliance certificates, the operational parameters or records of the equipment that needs to be maintained for producing to the authorities as and when the question of compliance is being raised. We spoke about the fuel oil non-availability report, and next is also, like we mentioned earlier, irrespective of the choice of fuel, there is expected to be an increase in cost that comes associated with this regulation, and it is very important that cost is being factored in for all voyage cost calculations and for fixing of the vessels for their future voyages as well. And last but not the least is a quick look in terms of what happens to the fuel oil market post-2020. We believe a big part of the high sulfur fuel oil, especially considering it's expected to drop in value by almost 50%, is that the power plants, it is going to be factored more into the power generation market. And if we look more in detail on the Saudi power plant consumption pattern, because we are using Saudi as a reference because that is the world's largest per capita energy consumer when it comes to using crude and fuel oil in their power plants. And as per that, we determine at least about 3.2 million tons of high sulfur fuel oil going into just the Saudi power plant or the power generation consumption alone, because based on the consumption patterns for 2019 that we have seen to date. And finally, IMO 2020 is just the initial step. IMO has bigger ambitions and bigger plans in order to focus and attack the greenhouse emission gases. And 2030, the expectation is to reduce CO2 emissions by 40%, and 2050, the expectation is to reduce by 50% compared to 2008 levels. So all these scrubbers, the low sulfur fuel oil, they are the first step to what IMO considers a bigger transition in terms of the pollution curtailment. And that leads to bigger questions of what are going to be the next evolutions that's coming into the shipping sector. More new sources of energy requirements or new sources of propulsion requirements for the shipping sector or the maritime sector as a whole. So that's from me, and we conclude our presentations there. And thank you again for sticking with us for the presentation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ranjit and YC. I think we do have some questions coming in. So again, a quick reminder, if you do have a question, just pop in the Q&A box, and we will aim to answer it now. If not, we will obviously reach back later individually and provide you with an answer as well. So Ranjit, a few questions that have specifically come in for you. I think one, you mentioned about the kind of governance of the 3.5% cap. So the question that came in, I'll read out the question for you, Ranjit, and you can answer it. I would like to check what are the penalties for ships running on 3.5% sulfur fuel oil. Who is governing the ships to run on this fuel if you say the solution is to run scrubbers on the ship? So Ranjit, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, we are not saying that the solution is to run scrubbers on the ships to start with. So running scrubbers on a ship is one of the choice of compliance that ship owners can choose. And that is being that under the assumption that the equipment is going to be functioning completely normal throughout the entire period of its usage. When it comes to penalties for the 3.5% usage of 3.5%, I briefly touched upon this earlier. So the governing factor is going to be more in terms of port state controls and the flag state controls. So how we categorize this is anything within the territorial waters of a country, the port state control is going to be responsible for it. And anything away from the territorial waters out on open sea, it's technically supposed to be coming under the flag state. But like I mentioned before, the flag state has very little control on the actual ships that are flying their flag, mainly because most of them are the flag of convenience. And what this essentially means is that the regulation or the manning or the checks is going to be falling more in terms of the annual surveys or the intermediate surveys that are going to be conducted, in which case all the history or records of the operational parameters of the equipment, especially the scrubber equipment if it is being used, is going to come into scrutiny. And for the penalties, right now the only reference that we have is back when the whole SECA regulation came into force. And that's why we expect the complaints to be extremely high in the US and Europe, mainly because they have very established procedures when it comes to mandating or following up the checks are being done for ensuring compliance. And the last we know is that U.S. has fined some ship owners in the range of $1.5 million for non-compliance with their coastal sulfur regulations. And also the ship's officers have been sent or fined, apart from a few $1,000s, to also imprisonment for the non-compliance. So that is the basis in terms of what we have as of today, and the extent or the fines of each of the port states is going to be completely different from one port to the other. And we strongly believe that is going to be the huge factor which is going to determine how the compliance is going to pan out after the regulation comes into force.
Fair enough. Comprehensive answer. Thanks, Ranjit. YC, why don't we take one question on your end? I think we had this question about the fuel oil prices for January 20. So YC, I'll read out the question and you can provide an answer. Think 380 fuel oil prices for January 2020 are currently pricing at $230 a ton. Is there a floor price for fuel oil with an alternative use as heating or for power generation displaced thermal coal? What would be that floor price be on a rough basis? So YC, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'm sure there would be a floor price, but at this point, we probably do not know what the floor price is. But to give you a gauge, today, I mean, if we look at the Barge Brent crack as a proxy, right? Calendar 2020 Barge Brent crack has averaged at about minus $17 there or thereabout a barrel, right? Versus 2015 to 19 average, which is doing about minus $12. So you're talking a difference of about $5 or potentially 40-50% of what the 2015-19 average is. So in other words, come 2020, high sulfur fuel oil could lose about 50% of its value, right? So that to me would be what I would look at now. But whether that is the floor is hard to say. I mean, there's still some demand in terms of power gen, particularly for high sulfur fuel oil. But as we all know, there are not many places that are using fuel oil for power generation today. In fact, the world is moving increasingly to cleaner options for power gen like natural gas. Yep, hope that answered the question.
Brilliant. And I know we are literally on the hour, YC. So one more question for you, and then, as I mentioned, we'll reach out to people individually. Is it too simplistic to say that regulation change, leaving overhang of non-compliant oil, will lead to a rise in oil prices? So a minute to you, YC.
Okay. Well, I mean, depends on what prices you look at. I mean, if you're looking at crude prices, probably not. If you're looking at specifically sweet crude prices, yeah, because you will need sweet crudes to make low sulfur fuel oil. So generically, I don't think, say, Brent would be very much driven by this, yeah. And don't forget, at the other hand, you have an overhang of high sulfur fuel oil, which the world would not know how to dispose of it entirely. So that would also be bearish sour crudes. So it's not a single answer to the question, but it depends on what actually you're looking at. If you're using Brent as a benchmark, then probably not. Yeah, hope that answers it.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, I know we are right on the hour, so I think what we will do is close off the webinar session for now, and any more questions, and I see a number of them already that we have received, we will reach out with the answers individually so that we provide a good overview for all of you. So once again, thank you everyone who dialed in to listen us live. YC and Ranjit, thanks a lot for providing all the input and analysis. Again, a reminder, I think the analysis, insight, everything from news and everything else about IMO 2020, it is available via ICON. If you do search for the oil research pages, you will find plenty of analysis within ICON as well. And if you would like to speak to anyone about more information from within ICON or free trials, please do reach out to us as well. So appreciate you, everyone who joined in today, and we hope to see you again on another webinar very soon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.